Mrs. Ratcliffe here, and today I'm talking to you about multiplying decimals. Okay, so the good news is multiplying decimals is quite a bit like multiplying whole numbers, except that there's one little trick that you need to use to figure out how many of the numbers in your answer are actually going to be behind that decimal point. So I will show you the trick. So firstly, you start off just like you normally would, multiply the decimals just like whole numbers. Then you're going to count the total number of numerals that are behind the decimal point in your problem for both the numbers you're multiplying, and then you're going to put that many numbers in your answer behind the decimal point. I'll show you what I mean. Here's an example. Let's start with this one. Just move it a little bit that way so you can see. 4.35 times 0.2. So firstly, you just start like you would with a normal multiplication problem. 2 times 5 is 0. Oh, sorry, 2 times 5 is 10. And the one up here, 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7, and 2 times 4 is 8. Okay, so far so good. But Mrs. Ratcliffe, how do I work out what numbers go behind the decimal point? Well, let's count. We've got 1, 2, 3 numbers behind the decimal point in our problem. So we just count 1, 2, 3, and we put the decimal point there. Pretty easy. Let's look at another example. 1.302 times 0.5. So again, just like we would if there were decimal points there, 5 times 2 is 10, and the one up here, 5 times 0 is 0, plus 1 is 1, 5 times 3 is 15, and the one up here, and 5 times 1 is 5, plus 1 is 6. Okay, now let's count how many numbers were already behind the decimal point in our problem. 1, 2, 3, and 4. So now we count from the right, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we put our decimal point here. It's pretty easy. Now, this is where a reality check is important, so you kind of ask yourself, does that make sense to me? And the thing that's handy about this number is we know that 0.5 is the same as saying 5/10, so it means you can put 5 over 10, and 5/10 is the same as 1/2. So we know that we've got 1/2 here. So then we can look at our number and say, is 0.6510 roughly sound like it's about half of 1.302? And the answer is yeah, it's pretty good. So I think we can confidently say we've got the right answer. Okay, now let's look at dividing, which is a little bit more tricky, but nothing to be worried about. Okay, with dividing decimals, it's like dividing a whole number. But there are a few little tricks. The first thing is you want to make sure that you move the decimal point above the number that's being divided in the location that it is. So just move it straight up. So for example, in our example here, where we've got 2.5 being divided by 2, we're going to move our decimal point directly above the decimal point in the dividend. Okay, now let's divide. 2 goes into 2 one time, so we're going to put our 1 over the whole number, which is the 2. Okay, now this is the other hot tip. Add any trailing zeros. Remember, they're optional. You can add trailing zeros to your dividend until you get an even number or no remainders, or you can establish that it's repeating or it goes for so long that you just want to stop. So in this instance, 2 goes into 5 2 times with a remainder of 1. So I've got a 1 here. We can add a trailing 0, and that makes the 10 there. So then 2 goes into 10 2 times. Sorry, 5 times. And then we've got our answer. Okay? So you can keep doing that. You can keep adding trailing zeros until you get a nice even divide. Pretty straightforward. But Ms. Ratcliffe, I think you're saying you haven't shown me how to divide by a decimal number yet. Good, you got me. I'm going to show you now. If you're dividing by a decimal, the easiest thing to do is to just move the decimal point over so that you're converting your decimal number into a whole number. So for example here, we've got 0.6, and we're dividing 4.2 by 0.6. Now, the important thing is if you're going to change your decimal divisor into a whole number, so if you're going to change this into a whole number, you're going to move the decimal point. You have to do the same with the number you're dividing the dividend. So, in this instance, 0.6, we're going to move it one place to the right. So we're going to turn it into a 6, but we have to do the same with the number we're dividing. So 4.2, we're going to move that decimal point one place to the right as well. So in this instance, we're going to move the decimal point there. Now all of a sudden, we've got a really simple problem. We've got 6 going into 42, which we all know is 7. Okay? So just to recap on that, if you're dividing by a decimal, you can actually move the decimal place to the right until you've made it into a whole number, as long as you do the same to the number you're dividing. So it may be tricky if you've got something like 0.6 and it's going into, let's say, it was already 42. What would you do then? Well, you're still moving the decimal place to the right, so you're actually going to add a 0 there and put the decimal place after it, okay, so that you get the same answer. All right, and that's the basics of what you need to learn how to divide decimals and multiply decimals. So good luck, and let me know how you go.